Hi, everyone. Today, our guest is Dr. Rachel Yerbury, PhD. Rachel is a registered psychologist as well as a lecturer and a researcher in the School of Psychology and Public Health at Trobe in Australia University. Her research area, which I just love, focuses on the connection between humans with nature, world and animate worlds and how this impacts mutual well-being in particular. And we're both sitting here with dogs on our laps at the moment. Rachel is an author, a mother, and also the widow of Dr. Justin Yerbury. Sunday the 28th of July was the first anniversary of Justin leaving us, and Rachel very bravely, after a long on and off discussions, has decided to join us today on the podcast. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute joy. So I'm going to ask you again, now that we're online, how are you at the moment?
Yeah, I'm going okay. I always find that anniversaries and that kind of thing are most difficult in the lead up and then the day themselves. And then when I wake up the following day, I kind of feel a bit relieved that I got through it. Christmas Day was like that.
Yeah, I think you and I spoke on or texted day after Christmas Day. It's an awful day. There's no getting away from it, actually.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rachel, we like to find a little bit about the person, not what you do,
Mm.
but who you are. So who's Rachel Yerbury?
I think Rachel Yerbury is in the process of redefining who she is,
Mm-hmm.
and refinding my identity. Um, Justin and I met when I was 17. We were both 17,
Wow.
and we were together every day um, for more than 30 years. So redefining who I am has been a bit of a journey,
Mm.
particularly in the last 5 years. And so I think I've discovered that I am, um, I guess, a combination of both tough warrior and a soft and vulnerable nature lover. So when I need to, I can fight, and I particularly fight for justice. And there was lots of fights that Justin and I had about discrimination and equity and access and all those kinds of things with the NDIS and commercial enterprises as well as local councils and things like that. So I had to be a fighter. At times I didn't like being a fighter and being
Yeah.
a warrior. And I think Justin was definitely fighting everything in his life, and his book's called Fighting Fate. And then I discovered that I was also a warrior, because without me, he couldn't fight. But I think the other side of me is, the soft and vulnerable person who's very sensitive and finds things very difficult, and have definitely found the last 8 years very difficult, 9 years difficult. Um, yeah, so I guess I'm a combination of the two, and the soft one loves nature, and I love to be out snorkeling and under the water and watching whales and dolphins and walking along the beach.
I went to Antarctica this year, and the main reason I went was for the whales.
Yeah,
They,
wow.
they just give me so much joy and peace. And mm.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of whilst a lot of Australians listen to this,
Mm,
we do have a lot of people from overseas. So could you
mm.
tell us who Justin was?
So Justin was, when I met him, just a tall, gangly, basketball playing teenager who had just finished his schooling and was about to embark on a commerce degree. But his first love and passion was basketball. So he was, when I met him, very, very driven, practicing basketball in every spare minute. But pretty soon, we became very close, and I still had 1 year of schooling to go. So he embarked on his first university degree, which he just did because, that's what you did on the side when you
Yeah.
were playing basketball. Um, And I never would have expected, fast forward a couple of decades, that he would be professor of neurological diseases and researching neurodegenerative diseases such as motor neuron disease, and considered one of the experts in his particular field of protein misfolding within the disease of motor neuron disease. So he transformed from that tall, shy, gangly teenager to a very confident and very intelligent, world-renowned biologist who would get up and speak to thousands of people at conferences. Apart from that, he was a very wonderful and loving husband and father to our two daughters, who are now in their late 20s. When he was diagnosed at age 42, he was probably about maybe the 25th person in his family to be diagnosed with motor neuron disease. And that's what drove him to go back and study biology as his second degree and then go on to a PhD, because he had lost so many family members, including his mum and his sister and various cousins, all of his aunties. So, yeah, he was, I guess, an accomplished and passionate person in all areas of his life, both family, basketball initially, very committed and loyal friend, father, and researcher.
Sounds like another warrior.
Very much so.
It's kind of unfathomable, that word, that there are 25, but there's now more than 25 in your family, isn't it, who've had MND?
I don't really know the count. Yeah, but certainly Justin's mum, grandma, his grandma's sisters, and his mother's brothers and sisters, except for one out of the 8, have all died of motor neuron disease.
What did Justin love most about studying biology? Was it the discovery?
In terms of when he was studying biology in the early days, what he loved was sharing the wonders of the world with the girls, making, experiments, blowing the lids off Milo tins for their class, and, making exploding volcanoes with bicarb soda in the front yard. That's what he loved at first, just because he always had a curiosity and a wonder of the world. And I guess that extended into his research, where he felt like he was making a difference. And if he'd had more time, I really believe that if there was a cure to be found for motor neuron disease, he would have found it. And I think he just had that ability that a lot of researchers don't actually have, which was innovation alongside their curiosity. So you might be able to see the questions, but you can't necessarily see how to design an experiment to find the answers, but he could do all that. And so he had a lot of ability to be creative in the process. And I think that's what he loved. He loved the challenge and to find creative ways to answer the various questions that would come up.
There would have been a lot of empathy as well, though, which whilst getting there was cruel. Don't take offense, researchers in the world, but sometimes empathy can be missing from researchers as well, because you've not met anybody with MND, for instance, in this instance, or you've not lived with them, or you've not spent half an hour with them to see, how difficult their life actually is and what it entails. So Justin was diagnosed 9 years ago?
Yeah, 2016.
Oh, that's
May
8 years ago.
2060,
Yeah.
8 years ago. Yep.
And what was his progress like?
So the first year, it was very slow. Um, so he was diagnosed in the May, and the following, and then he started on the copper ATSM trial in the November, and he was the first person in the world to embark on that clinical trial. Um, Unfortunately, the dose didn't get high enough to make any difference to him, but he still believed in that. However, yes, it didn't make any difference. So the following April, it was really like, so that was sort of almost 12 months. We went back to Cambridge where we had lived, and he had really only lost full use of one of his arms and hands, and the other one was a bit deteriorated, but everything else was okay. And then by the July, so only a couple of months later, he was then struggling to walk, and we noticed the first signs of him struggling to breathe. So that was very, very rapid. So that
Yeah.
was in the July. By the December, he went on to NIV which is non-invasive ventilation, in September.
Yep.
By the December, his neurologist said, if you don't have a tracheostomy or a laryngectomy in the January, then you won't live till Easter, which would have been not even 2 years after diagnosis. So by December, all of a sudden, he couldn't walk. He couldn't really move anything except for his face, and he couldn't breathe. He was laboring for breath. He couldn't be off the NIV for very long at all. He was pretty much on it 24 hours a day. So he went from just starting the NIV in September to being fully dependent by December. And yeah, all of a sudden not being able to walk. The changes between July and December were so rapid that there was almost something every day that he lost. So I was frantically at the time working as a psychologist 3 days a week in a school, still parenting my young adult children, doing a PhD, being the sole carer for Justin, and trying to navigate all the changes and our lack of equipment, because we really didn't have any need for anything for the first year. And then all of a sudden, daily, there was something else happening. So his progression was slow for the first year, and then it became rapid. And so my dad basically moved into our house almost in order to renovate furniture, the house itself, sometimes taking out walls, taking out doors, doing all this kind of stuff, and helping me with,
Yeah.
lifting him and all this kind of stuff. So it became very, very traumatic in lots of ways, very quickly.
It's extremely traumatic. You mentioned before that you had to be a warrior, and I find that many of us have to for our person. In relation to NDIS, so did your dad come in and assist you with those building because the NDIS was so slow?
Yeah, so I have a friend who's director of social work in a group of hospitals. And when Justin was diagnosed in May 2016, the NDIS was just kind of kicking off. And she recommended to me that we put in an application as soon as we could.
Yep.
And I was very reluctant, and I said, I don't think we need to. And there's not really anything we need. And she said, look, you're better off just getting in early. It's just starting off. And I've always been so grateful that she gave me that advice and I followed it, because we had things in place so that when things did escalate, we were already registered. We already had a support coordinator through MND, New South Wales, I think at the time. And we had a little bit of care already. However, having said that, it seemed like the early stages were much easier to navigate than the rest. So the rapid deterioration of Justin was not something the NDIS seemed set up in 2017 to cope with. And so I had discussions with planners on the phone who said to me that after 3 months of considering our request for a lift or a ramp to get Justin up the 10 steps into our house, that we should think about renting at our own expense a different house, which didn't have any stairs, in order to be able to get him out of the house, because he was working right up until his death
Yes.
as a professor of neurodegenerative diseases. So he was
Yes.
still at that point before COVID going into the university every day. And even though the NDIS was set up to try and empower people and to make them,
Let
and
them work,
let them
live,
work and to
live the
prolong,
best of their life.
absolutely, and to fulfill their personal goals, despite that, they had not looked at our application for a ramp for 3 months. So Dad decided to just take matters into his own hands, and he just built the
Build the
ramp,
bloody ramp. Yeah.
got the working bee done, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And so that was probably about the October 2017. And we just never heard anything back from the NDIS. So when the NDIS rejected our application for a wheelchair for Justin in January 2018, because they said that he would not live long enough to make their investment worthwhile.
Worthwhile. Yeah.
We then, and Justin by then had already had the laryngectomy, so his prognosis was longer, but that's not the point. And so we had launched a GoFundMe campaign, and basically written on that GoFundMe campaign, that was February 2018, that the NDIS had denied our application, and this is what they'd said. And we had enough money. We had $30,000 raised within about 24 to 48 hours on the GoFundMe page. So the media saw that and contacted us and said, what's going on? What's the story? Blah, blah, blah. And so then it went from there. Plus, we already had contacted our local federal member and garnered their support. And between the media and the political aspect of it, we were able to turn things around. And not only for us, but for other people with MND, because it seemed like at the time, because it was, early babyhood of the NDIS, that the NDIS didn't understand that some people didn't have a permanent and stable disability, that some people actually had an evolving disability because the disease progression was such that things would change.
Rachel,
And
that's
so they
still
would,
happening today. As
yes,
we speak, it's
yeah.
happening.
I've actually purposefully stayed out of what's happening in the NDIS the last 12 months because I was so heavily involved in it for so many years. I just needed a break.
Good.
But yes, I believe that under the Labor government, we had expected things to be different. And I believe that they're not, unfortunately. So yeah, I don't know enough to comment on what's happening now, but certainly back then, our local member got in touch with the then Liberal minister, and who was Dan Tehan at the time. He, I believe, rang our local NDIS branch and put a bit of a rocket up them.
Bet he did.
I got a call and invited to meet the area manager or regional manager or someone who'd come up from Canberra. And yeah, we got the wheelchair.
Gee, there's a shock.
And we got the disability bathroom, which was something we needed before Justin could come home from hospital, because he was going to require 24-hour care, because he was in ICU for 6 months after the laryngectomy.
Jesus. Just for those who don't know, Justin has had an extremely high profile in Australia, for considering what Rachel has said before, his career, and also as a person with MND. So, it's just mind-blowing to me that you had to struggle through all of that. And probably doing that GoFundMe was a really good idea because it's a great way to get the media's attention.
Yeah,
You know,
well,
if
people know
someone
that.
like Justin struggles and you
Yeah.
struggle, then, what hope is there for the rest of us?
Yeah, well,
Oh,
that's right. And so I sort of then became not only the voice for Justin, but the voice for a lot of people who didn't have the privilege that we had and the platforms that we had to be able
yeah.
to express what was going on for people.
When he had the laryngectomy and he was in for hospital for 6 months,
Mm.
is that standard procedure or was he getting infections or?
So not very many people in Australia
No,
do a laryngectomy.
no.
Um, there's a couple of other families that we met with prior to them having a laryngectomy or met with them after having a tracheostomy, people that we've been sort of in contact with.
Yeah,
But there's very few people. And partly that is because people who have MND, who live with MND in Australia, do have to fight to prolong their life artificially. In some countries, and I believe that's, for example, Japan, people are offered either to go down the palliative route or offered to have the mechanical ventilation inserted as a matter of course. But my understanding is in Australia that you really need a neurologist to fight for you.
mm,
And Professor Don Moreau, being Justin's neurologist, he had, as far as I know, already been involved in a couple of people's artificial ventilation, and was as well after Justin. So he has advocated and fought, and he's definitely a warrior.
yeah.
Um,
We know him.
fought for a lot of people who have wanted to go down that path because it's not a right that is given to all people through the health providers that they utilize.
Correct. Dom has been on the show and Dom cared for my husband.
Right. Yeah.
So we all know him very well.
Yeah.
Um,
So, your question was about the 6 months.
yeah,
So it's really hard to know. So a lot of the 6 months was really getting his care team. So the first 3 months he needed to be in hospital for medical reasons, and we were up in Macquarie University Private Hospital.
yeah,
And then we applied under the old New South Wales Enable Home Ventilation, Adult Home Ventilation Program.
yep,
And they required Justin to be admitted to a local public hospital before discharge. So we went down to Wollongong Hospital. The Royal Flying Doctor Service took him in the ambulance down to Wollongong, transported him from Sydney, and then we stayed another 3 months. And the second 3 months really was to stabilize him. He became pretty stable pretty quickly because we got a cough assist machine, and we got that through Young Care. And so at the time, the NDIS wasn't providing that kind of equipment. We were
yeah,
getting the equipment all through New South Wales Health, and then the only thing through the NDIS was the care. And so it was all very confusing.
yeah.
And we were really struggling to recruit caregivers. So we stayed another 3 months in ICU at Wollongong,
Oh my God.
training the support workers.
Oh my God.
So it's pretty standard that people do stay that long, I think.
Long. Did he get bored crazy?
Yeah, but at the time he was still writing papers and working,
Okay,
and he could still move his mouth, so he could
okay,
still sort of communicate with people. There was a lot of fear though, particularly when his stoma was fresh and he was often inadvertently injured, which is why I needed to be there so close. And I sort of moved up to Sydney for 3 months
yeah,
so I could be at the hospital every day. Um, but then down in Wollongong, I kind of thought, I could go back to work and things like that. But then, it wasn't as straightforward as that. So there was a lot of involvement from myself, even though, he was in ICU and he had nurses and he had support workers he was training, I was still there every day.
I've just come from a meeting with two women who are carers for their husbands. And that's the topic of conversation is, and we're trying to put a protocol in place, because you really have to be there with your person when they're in hospital. You can't just up and leave. Someone has to be there as well. Okay. So were there any issue, because it's such a rare thing, did he get infections and things when he was with the laryngectomy?
Yeah, he did. So he developed a fistula, which meant he needed a second surgery. He also developed infections, Pseudomonas infections, and that was something that you just get from hospital, is my understanding. So urinary infections as well as lung infections. He had pneumonia a few times. Once he had the cough assist machine, he never got pneumonia again. The cough assist machine was like magic. And when we had visited Stephen Hawking in Cambridge, they had said to us, make sure you get a cough assist machine. And that was a pretty standard thing for MND sufferers in the UK at the time, but we hadn't ever heard of it. And we didn't have one at Macquarie University Hospital, but they did have them at Wollongong. And so we were able to see the difference it made. So he didn't get any infections in his lungs after that.
It's amazing.
But he did have this kind of, recurring Pseudomonas infection.
So did the two of you know Professor Stephen Hawking's prior, like from when you were living in Cambridge, and had you met him?
No, so we met him. No, so we met him for the first time when we went back to Cambridge in April 2017. And Justin's mentor, Sir Professor Chris Dobson, who was Master of St. John's College, he had met Stephen and Stephen's family because they actually filmed Stephen's film at St. John's College. And Chris, being the master of St. John's, he had a lot to do with the family. So he set up the meeting.
And how was it?
For me, it was, well, it was very different. But yes, it was very confronting and very scary to see that that's what Justin could end up like. For Justin, he found it very amazing. And I think that's what at that time clinched his belief that you could live a very worthwhile life, particularly if you've got enough sort of going on in your head and enough that you can output, then you can actually live a very meaningful life after you're fully paralyzed and ventilated. I wasn't able to see that.
No, at that point, no. But he couldn't have done it without you. And this, no. It's,
and he acknowledged that every day.
Yeah, of course.
And he acknowledged that in his book. And
what's the matter with you? Oh, sorry.
And and in the many media articles and stuff that we did, he was always saying that.
How are your girls?
Yeah, okay. It's been a hard year to get through the first of everything, as you would know and your listeners would know. And so it's a journey. It's just, you've just got to do it. You just put one foot in front of the other and figure out what your life looks like now.
My daughter said that she said, even though you know it's going to happen, the first year is a shock, and the second year the grief hits in. And that was very enlightened of her to say that. That's how it worked for me too. First year is a shock, and people say, how can it be a shock? Well, it is a shock. Intellectually you understand that it's going to happen, but not from the perspective of your heart.
No, that's right. That's right. And I think that what people don't realize is, even though you might know that there's a family link and that there might be a risk, the way that you cope is that you believe that your person won't get MND, because if you think they will, you'll end up, getting into bed and not getting back out.
Exactly.
So in order to live and in order to cope and in order to live life to the fullest and be grateful, which is what we always tried to do, we had to believe that Justin wouldn't get MND.
Yeah.
And so I had all these fantastical ideas that because Justin was such a wonderful person, because he was such a wonderful researcher, he would be protected.
Yeah.
Obviously, that made things a lot harder.
Yeah.
Because, when you hope or you believe in something and you engage in denial, it can be confronting. But at the time, it's all you can do.
Yes.
And it protects you.
We have to protect ourselves. I've just had a memory that the last book that my father-in-law read was Stephen Hawking's last book. And it was sitting on he had his armchair and it was sitting on the table next to there. And Robert used to pick it up and read it and look at it, never imagining once that he would ever get that bloody hideous disease. What you were saying before also is that redefining who you are is, for me, and from what you've said too, I actually wrote down not long, about 6 months after Robert had died, who am I now? I'm no longer a wife, and my children are grown. I'm no longer a mother, mothering role. The work that I was doing, I wasn't doing anymore. And it's a big redefining moment in your life.
It is.
You can take it, grab it, and run with it. Or you can sit in grief, or dare I say victimhood. But that's because I'm a bit cynical. I find that it is extremely important to do that.
So I've explored those themes through the memoir that I've written, which I haven't had a publisher for yet, but I completed my memoir before Justin died, about 6 months before, and have been sort of, I guess, looking particularly at the journey from victim to warrior and exploring the idea of identity separate to roles and getting in touch, I guess, with what was important to me. It didn't become less important, but what was important to me before I met Justin, trying to figure out who I was then, trying to figure out, I guess, how I could navigate this journey, and writing my memoir, which I started after I finished my PhD 4 years ago. That was actually a real therapeutic process for me, because I was able to explore a lot of those themes about identity and victimhood and all those kinds of things, which are to a certain extent inevitable that we fall into for periods of time. But, as a psychologist, knowing that, those things weren't going to help me long term and I needed to shake things up a bit.
And another thing I was talking about with these women today is that one doesn't necessarily want their identity forever to be MND.
Yeah, I just feel like that. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I've stepped away a little bit from MND stuff. I did, I have presented at,
I've seen some of them. They're amazing.
yeah, conferences and things, and contributed, to other things to do with MND, but I'm sort of nowhere near as involved in it, because it's just too close to home. And Justin was one of those rare people who could actually work as an MND researcher, compartmentalize that. Yeah, but even before he had it, he knew how triggering it was for me, and he was able to separate our family life from it. So not everyone can do that. And I guess not only do I not want my life to be defined by MND, but I also don't want to be defined as Justin's widow and as someone who's grieving for the rest of their life. So it's really hard, I think, to find the balance with that, to miss the person and still love them, and and to be grieving, and I'll always love Justin,
Yeah.
and I'll always miss him, but I also have to live.
Yes.
And that can feel like a guilty pleasure
Yes.
at the time.
Yes, you have. I, and I know other people do, have um, concurrent guilt and happiness, happiness and guilt. And yeah, it's difficult to deal with, I have to say, sometimes. Mm.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It
Yeah.
is. And you bounce back and forth between the two.
Between the two. Now, I've wanted to, because of your, the Rachel and nature
Mm.
combination, Rachel, do you know that the collective noun for a group of widows, which is you and me at the moment, is known as an ambush,
Ah, really?
which is the same as a collective noun for a group of tigers?
There you go.
I know.
Warriors.
Warriors.
Mm.
Mm.
Warrior widows. Oh, there you go. Interesting.
Yeah, when I read that, I thought of you. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to tell it, got to say it to her.
Yes, I didn't know that before, so thank you.
That's a pleasure. So have you planned out the next year, or are you just taking it as it comes?
No, I haven't planned it out. I think I do a lot of I guess personal development and self-care now that I didn't have time for many years.
Yeah.
Um, I can sort of come and go as I want,
Yeah.
which um, I couldn't do
No.
for a long time,
Mm.
first as a parent and then
Yeah.
as a carer.
Kara.
So this is the first time in my adult life
Yeah.
where, and I'm about to turn 50. So it's a significant, I guess, time for me just to reassess and recalibrate.
Gets better after 50.
Is that right?
Yeah. Really good. Because you care less what people think about you, right?
Yeah, I've cared less for a while now, actually, to be honest. With everything we've gone through, I just think it makes you put life in
It
perspective.
really does. Yeah. I'm so grateful for your time. You've been really generous and really brave too, because I know this is something that I kind of shoehorned you into.
I don't know, that's fine.
It's been lovely. And
Been a
I
pleasure.
read that book that you wrote and I loved it. It was
Mm,
very good for me to read it. And,
mm,
I don't know that, when I was sitting on the lake, when I finished that and those little
yeah.
ducklings were swimming around me, it was extraordinary.
Mm,
And
yeah.
that was a message from somewhere.
Yes, thank you.
Pleasure. Is
Yeah.
there
Well,
anything?
hopefully I'll get it published one day.
Yeah. Come on, any publishers out there, read it, publish it. It's very good. Is there anything you'd like to say to all of us before you clock off and cook your dinner?
No, I guess the only thing I want to say is just be kind to yourself
Mm.
because you're doing the best that you can under pretty awful circumstances, and whatever happens, you'll always have yourself, and you'll always be your own best friend or your own worst enemy. So that's, one of the choices you can make, and there's not many. So,
Mm. That's beautiful. Yeah, we do have a choice.
hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having me on the show.
We will stay in touch and thank you so much. And
Thank you.
is yours sound asleep? Because mine's,
Yeah, my
yeah,
puppy's sound asleep. It's that time of day.
yeah. You're very pretty, but you're not very smart, are you? No. All right, love. We will be in touch and I'm very grateful.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rach.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.